Well, our first panel for the afternoon is going to be about the role of FinTech in helping broader business, and we have a pretty epic group of people to talk about it. A couple of great storytellers. I met Dash last night, and we could almost fill an entire panel with Dash's stories. Dom, of course, has a similar talent and was helping us all enthralled. I still think we should stick Dom in the Regent for about an hour and a half, and he could tell a whole bunch of stories about his life building startups and fintechs, and everyone would be enthralled. But we do have Samina Hussain Lech. Sam, great to have you here from Square. We have Dash Liscombe from EML Payments. Dom Pym, of course, from Up and Up and Up and Up. Having a great time doing it. And the fabulous, the Eartha Kitt of New Zealand, the Adrian Muir from VoxSmart. So guys, yell, scream, clap, stamp, come on, welcome this panel. That's it.
Can you hear me? Come on in, everyone. Strap in, this is going to be the best one you've had yet, all right? Thank you very much for the introduction. So welcome everyone to today's panel. If you want to come up nice and close, we have been told there might be a few t-shirts thrown to the crowd. I'm joking, but we might. So for best question or something, yeah. Maybe a pen. Sorry, it's so Kiwi, isn't it? Okay, so today's panel is, obviously we've got the formidable team in front of us, but just to introduce myself, I'm Adrian Muir and I'm the Group COO at VoxSmart. We're a RegTech FinTech. We're headquartered in London, offices in Madrid, New York, and more recently APAC. I've come back from London to live in Queenstown. My first Intersekt and my first panel with these guys, which is amazing. Just quickly, VoxSmart works with some of the world's largest fintechs and banks. We provide communication surveillance, and we make sure that we're leveraging the latest AI and machine learning tech. Now I've ticked the box for my communications team. Let's move on. I'm not biased, but this is an amazing panel today. We're going to hear from the very best in payments and digital banking, fintech leaders in their field. Today's panel, as you heard, is titled The Role of FinTech in Helping Broader Business. And while it is a broad topic, we worked really hard to make sure that you walk away with something incredible as you leave. I'm guessing it's not lost on you here today that today businesses and their people are really focused and having to be forced to do a lot more with less, right? And actually having a number of conversations with people last night at dinner and yesterday and networking, we're hearing more and more about what is it we can do to really help. And what is it that FinTech and everyone here as well, what are you doing and what can we do to help broader business and help reduce complexity in how we live, how we work and how we do business. So we've got some amazing people on this panel that have done exactly that, if I'm really honest. So we've got Square make it easier for businesses to start, adapt and grow. Up make it simpler for consumers to manage their personal finances. And EML make embedded finance easier. So keeping that title in mind, I'd like to make sure that I formally, properly introduce everyone. Because we've got Dash, who's our product director, as you know. Dom, somebody called you last night the godfather of FinTech. I thought that was kind of cute. Let's Google that. And also, last but not least, we've got Sam, who is also Square's payments partnership and industry relations. So let's crack on and have a chat. We've only got 30 minutes, and I want to keep it broad. I'm going to throw it to you first, to my left, Dash. In your experience, how have you seen the landscape change in the last sort of 5 to 10 years?
Thank you very much. I think over the last 10 years, I can see 3 significant changes that come to mind. The first is cost. The cost of payments and finance in general has dropped precipitously, but so has margin. And this is something we're keenly aware of. And this is forcing a lot of realignment in our industry, a lot of consideration about where we should be in the value chain. And where additional spaces of value are being created that we can move into. So I think that's one of probably the first one that comes to mind. The other is that finance, payments used to be a heavy point of friction in moving value from one place to another. And increasingly what we're seeing happen is, of course, that friction has been reduced dramatically, but also that in itself financial services are becoming a source of value creation for adjacent industries, where rather than simply a friction point in delivering their core value propositions. And then thirdly, is that topic we talk about a lot in these conferences, not fully realized yet, which is embedded finance. And I think that's an area where we're going to see a huge evolution in the future. And this is an area where as EML, we like to focus on, and we see our future. So we see that the industry is sort of separating into those that are platform players that are going to try and do high volume, low margin, better and better. And then there are going to be those who focus more on particular problem solving for industries and segments. So at EML, this is the area we like to look at. And for example, there's the salary packaging industry in Australia, where we now have 90% market share. And what we did was, when there was a regulatory change, and it meant that the banks were no longer interested because they want to offer a one-size-fits-all product, we looked at that and we created a regulated product specifically for that industry that answered their needs. And as a result, we captured 90% of the market.
I think the answering the needs of what's required is really interesting, and we've all seen the little square things that everywhere in terms of FPOS, and I know that you've done a number of things as well in terms of banking, Dom. From your perspective, I mean, you've done a number of things in the last 5 to 10 years. What have you seen as also, Dom?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how macro we want to go, but FinTech is an industry in and of itself. It's one of the largest industries in Australia, financial services. And, you know, the acquisition of Afterpay is a good example, you know, the biggest in Australian history. So the thing I've seen is capital flows into the Australian market and access to capital being more possible for founders now than it was 10 years ago. The other is the extraordinary talent that we have, not just in this room, but in Australia. And, you know, we've been able to see organisations like Square and others set up their headquarters in Melbourne or Sydney or other cities in Australia because of the extraordinary talent that we have here. And then we've also seen the other side of it, where the different fintechs that I've been involved in over the last 10 years have lost a lot of their key talent to offshore. And so I think Australia is recognised as not only having a booming sector, but now having access to more capital to help grow that sector, and then also having the intellectual capital to be able to actually fulfil those promises to deliver better solutions or to disrupt. And so they're the sort of, I would say, broadly speaking, the main things that I've seen change in the last 10 years. What I'd like to see change in the next 10 years, is that another question? Or can I just slip that in?
I'm going to surprise everyone at the end with that one. He's just ruined it. It's all right, Dom. No, but I think it's a really good point, though, in terms of talent, right? And we've seen, I don't know if anyone realises there was a pandemic recently, and we've seen a lot of people. I've come back from London and I'm now living back in New Zealand. We're seeing a lot of people come back and bringing a lot of their talent and understanding. Regulatory environments are changing. They're coming back with incredible technical talent. Are you seeing that, Sam? Is that something that you're seeing as well, and how that is benefiting the kind of wider ecosystem of what's happening with our smaller businesses here within Australia?
Yeah, I mean, specifically on the talent part, I know back in the midst of the pandemic, that was a big challenge, and probably is still a big challenge for a lot of businesses to attract the right talent. But we were actually on that cycle of seeing people return and being able to attract really good talent off the back of that as well. Specifically to the question about what we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years, I wouldn't mind giving my perspective on that. Because I think Square has an interesting story to tell on that as well. And so I think, you know, what we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years in Australia is that fintech has really gone from something that, you know, there were fewer fintechs, and they were often seen as a threat and, you know, challenging the status quo. And that's what fintech does really well. They look at existing problems and they bring a new solution to very long-standing problems, and they solve them in new and innovative ways. And 5 to 10 years ago, a lot of incumbents saw that as a huge threat. And, you know, that's certainly, you know, a well-known story for Square entering the Australian market. The incumbents saw us as a big threat. But what we've now seen over the past 5 to 10 years is that that's now moved from a competitive threat to actually cooperation, and fintechs can actually work with incumbents to provide really great solutions to, you know, consumers, like what Up is doing, or to businesses like what Square is doing. So I think that's been a really great shift. And the other thing that we've seen out of that is the benchmark is just consistently moving in Australia of what is extraordinary to what is the norm. And so you think about what Up has done, and when you first launched, it was extraordinary for a consumer to be able to, get a bank account within minutes digitally on their mobile phone. No one was doing that. The same as Square for businesses, to be able to set yourself up to accept payments within minutes, or to walk into a retail store and purchase hardware. That benchmark is now the norm, it's now the status quo. And so fintechs are really helping lift the bar of what is the status quo, and we keep accelerating that in Australia, and we've seen that really shift over the past 5 to 10 years.
And that's an incredibly interesting point, right? Because we're in a situation where you've sort of seen things move, right, over time. So what do you think businesses need now? I mean, looking around, I think I sat on a panel yesterday, and we're talking about the amount of small businesses we've got out there and what we can do and what we're noticing. What do you think they need now, and are they focused in the right direction, and what can we be thinking about perhaps in terms of leveraging our experience? Because you're right, the word fintech and some of the things we're doing around innovation is not as scary anymore. People are much more familiar. Look how many people are around today. What is it, do you think, that these businesses need right now from us?
Yeah, I mean, we talk to our sellers all the time, and we're talking to business owners all the time. And the biggest problem that businesses are facing, whatever type of business they are right now, is staff shortages. And we know that's a huge issue. But business in Australia are extremely resilient. And what we've seen is that they are looking to do more with less, like you said, Adrian, in your intro. And so they're really leaning into technology specifically to help them do more with less. And actually, that's not just businesses, that's individuals as well, that's consumers. They're looking for solutions to help them manage their finances or manage their business and automate things that they just don't want to spend the time doing with pen or paper. So things like managing their inventory, things like, marketing to their customers, they're really leaning into technology to help them do more with less and give them back time as well.
Can I just add to that? I mean, I agree, but I would also say that maybe 10 years ago, we would talk about how every company is a technology company because they have to, install computer systems to automate or to recruit or to whatever it is they're doing, to manufacture. Actually, I think now what's happening is every company is a fintech because the two things that are common across all industries is technology and money. And so we can look at ourselves here as really early adopters, disruptors, the first movers in some of these spaces. But a lot of the things that we're developing in the fintech industry are actually now becoming that commonplace. And I'll just also add that in the Australian market, the big banks are pretty awesome and their technology is awesome. And therefore, on a global scale, the bar for an Aussie fintech is much higher than an American or a British or a Chinese fintech. And that's just a fact. So that means that not only are we seeing every company becoming a fintech, but everyone in this room is now having to do more in order to compete or disrupt. And I think that's definitely one way that we're impacting all businesses.
Yeah, I'm not quite as rosy about the position in Australia. I've come from Europe and the Middle East, and also had quite a lot of exposure to the Southeast Asian market. And I think one of the things we've been quite slow on is the regulatory environment here. So it's regulation that's driven a lot of this innovation. And I think by and large, regulators globally have been very aggressive in the financial services regulation space to drive innovation and open up the economies there, create competition. We've been a bit slower here in Australia. So I think when you compare it with Europe, and particularly when you look at things like the data economy that's going to be so influential, we are a bit behind. And I think what businesses need is for the regulators here and then the fintechs building on top of that regulation to create the platforms and give them time to create these new use cases that they will need before there's too much global competition coming in. So from an Australian business point of view, I think we need to give them the platforms to innovate and create these new use cases of the future on their products and services before probably the second trend, which is going to be the increasing globalization of the ecosystem.
Do either of you want to comment on that?
I agree. I will just say, though, that the flip side, and you probably hear from the regulators, the flip side is that Australia has been able to weather the financial storm and the challenges that we've faced over the last 10 years, perhaps better than Europe and perhaps better than the US and some of the Asian economies. I'm just putting it forward as a
different regulation.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. But I'm just saying that there is this nanny state that we live in, which is highly regulated and it has a positive and a negative perspective. And I just think they're both valid, right? Absolutely, we're in a challenging regulatory environment. I think that challenging regulatory environment requires additional innovation. So just as an example, when we wanted to start a bank in Australia, it was very difficult, and I've told the story many times, but you need hundreds of millions and you need a banking license and all that sort of stuff. Because the regulation didn't support it, we had to invent an entirely new way of doing it. And we did a contractual, joint venture, a legal arrangement. We talked to the regulators, and we got that through before the regulation changed, and we didn't even have a chance to get a restricted ADI because it didn't exist. So I think in that sort of tighter regulatory environment, yes, there's global competition, but it also demands more of people in this room to be a little bit more innovative in order to disrupt.
And I think the story of the story of kind of working closely with regulators and helping educate them is not a new one, right? We need to be working a lot more closely. But you guys have all been around for a little bit longer than perhaps some people. I think it's really important too, looking around, we've got some people who have been in this sort of environment for, a year or 18 months, right? And they're sort of looking at you guys thinking, yeah, well, of course, you've done X, Y, Z.
Yeah, we're old.
Well, they are thinking that, but you said it. So what I'm really interested in too is, some of the kind of the stepping stones that they could possibly be thinking about when it comes to what they actually need. I love what we're doing here with Intersekt. I love what the Australian FinTech are doing as well to help support. But is there anything else that you can think of as you sort of have looked overseas, Dash, or you've looked at other areas around government, treasury? Is there anything else you think might be of interest? It's an off-the-market question.
She didn't prepare us for that one. I don't mind sharing a thought on that, though. Look, just kind of back off the back of that conversation around regulation, I do think that we have this incredible environment in Australia where you can push the boundaries and kind of solve problems and do it. We have an environment that enables that. Sometimes there are things that we have to wait for regulation to, like in the crypto space, for example, I think regulation is really going to help enable boosting that forward, and that's where regulation can really help. But there are parts of our industry that are so over-regulated that it actually makes it really hard to innovate. Like the card issuing industry, for example, that just seems like a space that actually competition is difficult, and for new entrants is difficult as well. So I don't know if that answers your question about what else we can do, but I think it's staying focused on what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and not to feel like we have to work within the existing boundaries to deliver that. And I think Square's a really good example of that, of doing that.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think that, we've talked already about technology, finance and regulation. Those three things are important. We talked a little bit about capital. All of those things are important, but there's many ingredients to make a startup or to create a fintech. And we have a bit of a saying that we talk about. So obviously I work it up, but outside of that, I work with a lot of people in the room. And we have a saying about building an operating system for startups in Australia. And the reason we sort of coined that phrase is that it's actually a lot easier to set up a company in Europe or sometimes in some parts of Asia, and certainly in the US. Stripe Atlas means that I can just, as a startup founder, instantly set up a Delaware company, take payments, have a website, do all these things that you want to be able to do. I've got access to Square and all these amazing things that I can do in that market. That's not the same in Australia as it is internationally. So I'm kind of arguing with myself, but I am saying that it's not just in relation to one thing like money or talent or regulation or whatever it is. It's actually about enabling for everyone here to be able to not only lift the bar and beat the bar, but then continue to lift the bar. And that's why I think that the environment is quite friendly. The regulators are all here. We're walking around meeting the RBA, meeting with APRA. They're all here. That's unusual, actually having them in the room and being able to talk directly with them. The venture capitalists are here. So I just think that there's an opportunity for all of us to work together to continue to raise the bar beyond where it is now.
Speaking for EML, we love the regulators.
I think they got the memo.
Just want to get that out there. But we would love to see something also along the lines of the money regime out here as well. But as an issuer and processor, we're quite happy with the regulations there.
Well, there are other things like CDR and open banking and so on, where Australia has been very late to the game, and even the changes to the banking licences. We were 3 or 4 years after Europe. So there's definitely a lag in Australia. We're a long way away from the rest of the world, and there's definitely areas where we can do better. I think the CDR, for example, is a better implementation of data personal privacy than any other in the world, including in Europe. But we're miles behind where Europe is, and it's a long journey to get everyone to adopt those standards.
I absolutely agree. I think that's going to be critical for us because that's going to be a completely new type of economy. I mean, NPB is great, but it doesn't really change the use cases very much from a consumer point of view. CDR is going to be completely transformative. And I worry a bit from the Australian business point of view. And I'm not talking about the fintechs, but the businesses that rely on the fintechs in this space to adjust their propositions to compete in the information age. That the overseas competitors will come in, and a bit like Square in a way, right? Because Square took a long time to prove itself, to make all those learnings. But once it did, and it hit its straps, suddenly it exploded everywhere. And I worry a bit that the overseas competition will have had a lot longer in this information economy, and then they'll come in here and the local businesses won't have been prepared.
I mean, I've obviously been living overseas since about 1998 when I was 3, but I think you need to understand, I think you're over-egging it a little bit. We come over here and there's some incredibly amazing talent companies. I've spoken to a number of people here and I think you're underestimating just how incredible some of the areas are we're dealing in the talent. So I just want to make sure
Wouldn't be a good panel if we all agreed with each other.
Well, I'm not saying you have to agree, but I'm really interested that everyone in this room also gets some sort of idea about a little bit of wisdom from us, right? And again, we have been around for a while, and I think in terms of time, I want to throw some questions out to the audience as well, because you have got an incredibly smart panel up here to ask questions. But my final one is just, you've trodden the path, right? Knowing what you know now, and the conversations that you're having, and the sitting on boards, etc. at the moment, and what are the things that you think will be the biggest issues for us in the future, and what are some of the key things that the future might hold for businesses in terms of FinTech? I'm going to ask you, probably Dom, first. It sounds like this is something that you would love, because I think it's important to be leveraging experience in the situation, because it's a lot of people that I spoke to last night that are still like, I'm thinking about going to the UK, I'm thinking about maybe going to the US, I'm not quite sure about what I could do here, or how do I get the right talent? There's lots of questions, but what do you think are going to be the big things we're thinking about? Yeah,
so I'll just start by saying I'm working with Marnie, who's the Managing Director of the bank, and others, on a 25-year strategy for the banking group. And that's very, very difficult. Like, we don't have a crystal ball, but what it's taught me by going out and talking to people and trying to put together a long-term strategy like that, and other people might have heard me talk about UP's 100-year strategy, that sort of forward thinking, it helps you set a big, hairy, audacious goal, even if you'll never achieve that goal. It's like Elon Musk saying we're going to colonise Mars, but we're building cars and putting up some satellites and things, right? So I think that when we talk about the future, we can look 1 year, 10 years, 100 years into the future. The things that we've talked about, all the topics that we've talked about, I think they're the critical topics, particularly talent. So the pandemic, as Sam mentioned, has made us sort of reflect on the fact that people are moving back to Australia. As people are moving back to Australia, there's opportunities to work with them face to face, but we're also much more remote. Everybody's working remotely now. So the world is actually our talent pool. What I like to talk about is the innovation and the creativity, disruption and inventions that have come out of Australia. I won't bore everybody with it right now, but carbon fibre or Wi-Fi or these sort of things, they're incredible. Google Maps. They're incredible inventions that have come out of our minds, and they've taken over the world everywhere you look. So for me, the future should be able to support more of that type of innovation, and I like to think about it as intellectual property and intellectual capital. So intellectual capital is the people, intellectual property are these ideas, these assets that we create. Now, whether they're software or whether they're physical assets or whatever it is, we need to build an infrastructure and environment that can support that over the next 10 years so that we can continue to have investment from the regulators, from the governments, from the state bodies, from the industry bodies, and from all the minds around Australia in order to create the products of the future and then export them to the world. It was a bit esoteric, but
Loved it.
sets a vibe.
Well, that's broadening it even more, I think, the whole of economy. But I agree. I do notice here, I think sometimes the mindset in Australia needs to change a bit. It's quite insular now, as you say, even in terms of talent recruitment. So very few companies, for example, employ people outside Australia directly, but it is possible to do that now with current platforms. I think there's going to be, but the thing I think will completely transform us is both, as I said, the information economy, but also the opening up of the regulatory space to be transnational as well. And I think those are two things we will need to be prepared for in the future.
And Sam, I know that we touched on this when we were having a chat before. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I might just give a slightly different perspective just to add another flavour to this question around, what do we see over the next 5 to 10 years? And we started with what we saw over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think from Square's experience as well is that, we are going through a challenging economic environment at the moment for everybody. But we know that the nature of markets are cyclical. They go up and they go down. There's a lot of noise when it happens. And I think what's really important for organisations and all the fintechs here and the founders of fintechs, whether you're working for a fintech, whether you're 10 days old or 10 years old, is staying really, really focused on your core purpose. And that will enable you to go through these cycles. Square itself was born in 2009 after the global financial crisis. And, these environments, these bear markets are an incredible opportunity for fintechs in Australia and globally. We're here to solve problems and we do it in really unique ways. And so I think it's about staying really focused on your core purpose. And at Square and across Block, it's about empowering more people to participate in the economy. I'm sure you guys have your purpose and you know what it is, and it's about staying really focused on that so that you're not distracted by the noise, you're not too distracted by the immediate challenges, and that you're really focused on meeting your customers' needs and surviving the next 5 to 10 years and thriving as well.
I totally agree, and I think there are those immediate challenges that everyone in this room is more than likely facing, and we have got the role of FinTech in helping the broader business and the conversations that we're having. I think when I started my role back in 98 years ago, right, FinTech wasn't even a word. Okay, so I've been in FinTech forever, but it wasn't called that. And over time, things have evolved and changed. And I think that's a really important piece for us to remember. And I've spoken to a number of people at the moment just talking about how hard it is. And I've been in capital markets for years, and then in my role, I just know that it's probably the hardest one I've had. So I want to make sure that you've got a group of people here also that are hoping to be very helpful in answering some questions. Am I allowed to throw it out to the audience? Because it's Dash, Dom and Sam's show. So please ask them some questions because they have been very forthcoming with their...
Well, I could ask myself questions.
Go on, ask. I've got a question if we know.
Oh, this is your Kevin Rudd impersonation, Dom. Come on, we must have a couple.
You'll get a T-shirt.
Oh, here we go. Christian's a man who really needs a T-shirt.
I was lying about the T-shirt.
So, we're off.
Thank you. I think the topic of this discussion, this panel, has been a really important one for the overall Intersekt, sort of the depth of Intersekt here, because very often it's easy for us working very closely with regulators, with banking partners and others, but we never really move outside of FinTech. So it's sort of who are the enablers and the other stakeholders inside FinTech. So looking across your businesses, and anyone can jump in on this one, where do you see yourself supporting, as we talk about here, the broader business? Is it, a lot of the conversation has been around raising the bar? And I don't know if you mean that in a broader sense, look, FinTech can do it, therefore you can, but it's not actually proactively working with them. In what ways do you see yourself or FinTech overall supporting a broader societal development?
Maybe I can add to the question as part of the answer. To me, there's two different ways that fintechs can impact broader business. One is by servicing those broader businesses, by providing a product or a service in order to help those other businesses, other industries. And the other is by leading by example. So the example that Sam gave where, Up became the first instant issuance of a card into a wallet, that might sound like a small innovation, but that's teaching other people in other industries that they can compete with the incumbents, that they can set the bar higher, that they can do things. So we can actually be a leading force as an example for other industries. That might be education, or might be mining, or aerospace, or whatever it is. So I think they're the two ways that we can impact, and I think that each of these businesses impacts other industries partly in both of those ways. And so, Up doesn't service other businesses, but what Ferocia, the business behind Up, has done is helped at least 5 banks in Australia to improve their digital capability directly, and then potentially tens or hundreds of banks in order to lift the bar. So that's directly and indirectly assisting those others within our industry. Outside of our industry, we meet with all sorts of people who are inspired by what we've been able to do and how we've been able to do it. And I think that is important. I think everyone in here is an inspiration for people in other industries that are maybe struggling to have that same sort of disruption.
Couldn't agree more. We've got time for one more question. I know there's one more. Does anyone want to?
Or maybe not, Adrienne.
Go on then. Yeah. We done? Yeah. Okay, well, listen, I think we're done. Are we on time?
We're a little bit over, sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We're a little bit over. Damn. Hey, listen, I'd like us to all put our hands together and say thanks to the incredible panel. We've got Dash, Dom and Sam. Thank you very much for attending. Grab them afterwards, have a chat. Thank you very much.